The people are screaming. It's not the kind of war cry. It's the kind of scream that comes out when someone rips something out from inside you. The cry of a woman losing a child. The groan of a man who sees no way out. 600,000 men, and the families, and the elderly, and the children, all on their knees on the floor of the desert of Paran, punching the sand, tearing their clothes. And you are in the middle of them, standing, unable to move. It was your words that did this, not because you lied. That was the worst part. You didn't lie. You said what you saw, every detail, every wall, every man who made you feel smaller than you've ever felt in your entire life. You told the truth, and the truth destroyed 600,000 people in a single speech. In a single moment of absolute honesty, you condemned an entire generation to die in the desert without ever stepping foot on the land their entire lives were built to reach. Josué and Caleb are right there in front, tearing their own clothes, shouting that the land is good, that it can be entered, that Deus goes before them, and the people want to stone the two of them. Not because Josué and Caleb lied, but because their truth is harder to carry than the truth of the other 10. You look at Josué, he went with you, 40 days. He saw what you saw, the same walls, the same giants, the same scorching sun over Hebron. The difference isn't in what the two of you saw, it's in what each of you decided it meant. And now you're going to find out which of the two interpretations will cost more. To understand how you got here, you need to understand who you were before entering that land. Your name is Nabi, son of Vophsi, of the tribe of Naphtali. Naphtali camped north of the tabernacle in the desert of Sinai, one of the 12 tribes. Yours. Your father was a slave in Egitto. Your grandfather too. Your entire lineage, generation after generation, kneading bricks, carrying stones, building cities for a pharaoh who never knew your name. You were 12 years old when the plagues began. You saw the river Nilo turn to blood, saw the frogs invade every room of every Egyptian house while the Hebrew neighborhood remained in silence. Saw hail the size of a fist destroying crops, saw the darkness of 3 days where Egitto went blind while the land of Goshen had light. And you saw what happened in a dawn that no Egyptian will ever forget as long as they live, when the firstborn fell and the cry pierced the Nilo Delta from end to end. You saw all of that, and then you saw the sea open up. That's not a metaphor. You were there. You were 16. The smell of fear from 600,000 people mixed with the sea wind, the army of Pharaoh kicking up dust behind you, and in front, only water. And then the water opened. It was a wall on each side, firm as stone, and the bottom of the Mar Vermelho was dry ground beneath your feet. You walked with your own feet through the sea. You know what it smelled like. You know the noise the walls of water made when the wind hit them. You know how the ground stuck a little to your sandal because it was wet but firm. You lived that. So if there was anyone who shouldn't have been afraid of Canaan, it was you. A man who saw the impossible happen with his own eyes not once, but 10 times, 11 times, 12. But here's the problem with seeing miracles. They turn into memory, and memory is weak. What you are about to see in Canaan will be right in front of you. Visible, measurable, real, of flesh and bone. When Moises summoned a leader from each tribe for the mission, your name was the one chosen. Not the bravest, not the youngest, the most trustworthy. The man the elders of Naphtali judged worthy of representing the entire tribe before the Terra Prometida. You took it as an honor. You should have taken it as a warning. The mission was simple on paper. Enter Canaan, look at everything, come back and tell what you saw. It wasn't an invasion. It was reconnaissance. Like a merchant visiting a new market before deciding what to buy. There were 12 of you, one from each tribe. You knew some by name, others only by sight. Josué of the tribe of Ephraim, tall, eyes that never blinked at the wrong time, a calm way about him that seemed like confidence but could be something else. Caleb of the tribe of Judah, older, more somber, an old scar on his chin from a story he never told, the kind of man who walks into a noisy room and the room goes quiet. The other 10, all chiefs, all men who survived the desert, who saw the plagues, who crossed the sea. None of you doubted the promise. The issue was never doubting the promise. The issue was what you were going to find on the other side of it. You set out from Cades Barnea and went to the south of Canaan first, going up through the mountains. From the desert of Zim to Rehobi, near the ascent of Hamate in the far north. 560 kilometers round trip, 40 days in total to do the full survey. The first few days were what you expected. Open plains, hills with thin brush, some mud villages, merchant caravans on the road to Hebron. People looked at you but didn't sound the alarm. 12 men with no visible weapons could be about trade or a tribe in transit. You walked carefully without raising suspicion, observing everything, memorizing what you couldn't write down. The land itself was something else. You were from the desert. You were born in a tent, grew up eating manna that fell from the ground every morning, drinking water that Deus sent from where there was no water. You never knew the difference between a ripe fig and a green one, because figs were something the elders described as a memory of Egito, not as a reality. In the first week in Canaan, you ate a pomegranate for the first time in your life. A woman in a street market of a nameless village was selling them for change. The juice ran down your chin, and you just stood there in the middle of the road like a fool, unable to walk for a few seconds. This was the place you were going to. This smell, this burgundy color that stained your fingers, this water running in rivers that you didn't have to wait for Moises to strike a rock for it to appear. The Val de Escol near Hebron was where you cut the cluster of grapes. A single cluster on a vine that grew on the slope as if it knew it was sacred. So heavy it took 2 men and a pole to carry. You didn't participate in the cutting. You stood watching and thinking about your father who died in the desert without ever having tasted a fresh grape. In that moment, you wanted the land, truly, with everything you had. That desire was real and clean and had no ambiguity. And then you arrived in Hebron. Hebron was different from anything you had seen until then. It wasn't a village, it was a city. Stone walls built with blocks that a single man couldn't wrap his arms around. Blocks that the architects of the desert had never imagined stacked like that, in a locking system that made the walls stronger than anything Israel had built or inhabited. Tradition said that Hebron had been founded 7 years before Zoar in Egito, Zoar, which was one of the oldest cities in the known world. You could feel it. The stone there had the color of time, and on the outskirts of Hebron lived people different from those in the plains, the sons of Anake. You saw them for the first time on a morning of thick mist coming down a trail north of the city. There were 3 of them, Aimah, Sesai, and Talmai, sons of Anake, descendants of the Nephilis, of that lineage the other Canaanites whispered about with a kind of reverence that wasn't admiration. It was the other kind, the kind you learn when you grow up in a place where the strongest defines what is true. You will understand what a real giant is when you see one up close. It's not just a matter of height. You can estimate height. What you can't estimate is the scale that shifts when that man looks at you. Aimah's feet were larger than your shoulders. His arms carried logs of wood, like you would carry a bundle of kindling. They weren't monstrous. They were completely human, just in a proportion that made everything you knew about strength look like a rehearsal. Around them, the walled city, sentries in the towers that you could see from afar, soldiers with copper armor that sparked in the sun when the mist cleared. And you thought, involuntarily, with the part of your brain that calculates before asking permission, Israel is 600,000 men formed in the desert, without armor, without siege experience, without catapults, without any specific training to take a walled city. And this was just one of the cities, just Hebron. That night, Camped far from the walls, you and the other 11 stayed in silence for a time none of you wanted to measure. Caleb was the first to speak. He said they were strong, that they could be conquered, that the Deus who opened the sea would also open the walls. Josue agreed, with that calm voice that seemed to calculate while he spoke, that seemed to already be planning which entry route would be best. You didn't argue, not that night. But in the following nights, walking north, passing more cities, more walls, more Amalekitas in the southern plains, more Hettius and Jebuseus in the mountains, more Amorrheus in the interior, more Cananeus on the coast near the sea, you were doing a math that wouldn't leave your head. It wasn't a calculation of faith, it was a calculation of the ground. The only battle Israel had fought against an organized and armed people since leaving Egitto was against the Amalekitas in Rephidim. And it was a hard fight, and Moises had to keep his arms raised all day for Israel not to lose. And the Amalekitas were nomadic warriors, without a city, without a wall. What was in Canaan was different. These were stone cities with stone defenses, and men who were the sons of warriors who were the sons of warriors. Systems of war accumulated for generations, perfected, tested. And these people knew about the arrival of Israel. The Amarna letters, the correspondence between Canaanite kings and the Pharaoh, spoke about Hebrew groups crossing the borders. Surprise, if it ever existed, had passed. On the 15th day of the mission, you and the other 11 were sitting on a slope north of Hebron, looking at the Vale de Jezreel below, when one of the men, Gadi, of the tribe of Manasseh, stared at the valley for a long time without speaking. Then he said quietly, "How do we even get in here?" It wasn't a tactical question. It was the question everyone had been asking inside since Hebron. Caleb said the Deus who sent the plagues would send whatever was necessary. Josue said the land was good and it could be taken, and their words were true. The land was good. You knew that for sure now, and Deus had promised. But in your head, and you tried to push this thought away more than once, there was a question that wouldn't stop. The last time Deus acted directly, without a human intermediary, was at the sea. Since then, the people had fought, had complained, had worshipped a golden calf while Moises was on Sinai. The relationship between Israel and the promise had become more complicated than it was on the shore of the sea. And you wondered if Deus was still as present, as immediate, as available as on that night when the water opened. You shouldn't have asked that question, but you did, and it stayed with you during all the remaining days of the mission. On the way back, crossing the desert to Cades Barnea, the weight of what you were going to say began to take up the space where before there was only the exhaustion of the journey. You weren't going to lie. That thought was out of the question. To lie would be a greater betrayal than anything else you could do. The people trusted you. Your father trusted you. You were the chosen one of Naphtali. And leaders don't lie to the people about what awaits the people. The truth was, the land is extraordinary, and it will cost blood in an amount you don't know if Israel has. Caleb and Josue didn't talk much in the final days of the return. Not because they had given up on the argument, you could see that. It was that they were waiting for the right moment. You saw it by the way Caleb looked at the horizon when he stopped to rest, as if he were already planning which tribe would enter first, by which route, in which season. A man who had decided and was just waiting for the time to speak. And you thought, he saw what I saw. How is he arriving at a different place? The answer came later, when it was already too late to be useful. Caleb and Josue and you weren't arriving at different places based on different evidence. You were arriving at different places because the question each of you was answering was different. Caleb and Josue answered, "Will what Deus promised be fulfilled?" You and the other 10 answered, "What are we capable of doing?" The same land, the same giants, the same walls. The difference wasn't what you saw, it was who each side put into the calculation, and you had removed Deus from the equation, not out of deliberate disbelief, out of accuracy, because you learned through 40 years of desert that a miracle isn't something you plan. A miracle is what happens when there is nothing left, and you thought, in genuine good faith, that you were doing something better than trusting in the unpredictable. You were being honest, you were being responsible, you were protecting the people from an illusion that was going to cost lives. You were wrong. But the moment you opened your mouth, you were certain you were right. Before Moises, before the people gathered in Cades Barnea, you opened your mouth. You spoke of the land first, of the grapes from Val d'Escol, so heavy that 2 men could barely carry them, of the fig trees, the pomegranates, the water running in the rivers. You said the land was exactly what had been promised, that it flowed with milk and honey, that the fertility was real and not an exaggeration. The people heard these words with a kind of hunger you could feel on your skin, that silence that is more intense than a scream. Caleb tried to speak before you finished. He raised his voice, said they could conquer it, that they would certainly win, that it was time to go up and take it. But you had more to say. You said the people living there were powerful, the cities walled and very large, that you saw the sons of Anake, the Nephilis, those before whom any man seemed smaller, that the Amalekitas were in the south, the Hetteus and Jebuseus and Amoreus in the mountains, the Cananeus on the coast and in the valley of the Jordan, that the land was occupied on all sides, that there was no easy entrance, that the defenses were real. And then the other 9 opened their mouths together. You hadn't said everything they said. You had said it is difficult. They said it is impossible. You had said there are giants. They said before them we are grasshoppers. You had told the truth. They took your truth and added their panic on top of it. You were 10 voices speaking at once, and the people didn't distinguish between what you said and what the others added. The scream that rose up was like that of a single body torn in half. 600,000 men and their wives and their children in one night breaking from the inside. A cry that isn't from physical pain, it's from something dying inside. You stood there listening to the sound your words had caused, and for the first time since leaving Cades 40 days earlier, you felt something that wasn't fear of giants. It was fear of yourself. Because you realized, with that clarity that comes when there is nothing left to do, that you had answered the wrong question. The question wasn't, what are we capable of doing? It was, is what was promised to us real? And you, who had seen the sea open, who had seen 10 plagues fall in sequence upon Egypto while Israel remained untouched, who had eaten manna that appeared from nowhere every morning for 40 years, you had set aside the only piece of data that made the calculation completely different. The only element that transformed 600,000 armless former slaves into a force that could take any city from any giant. The sentence arrived the next morning. 40 years. 1 year for each day of the mission. The entire generation that left Egypto was going to die in the desert before entering Canaan. Not the whole generation because of their own cowardice, but because they believed the 10 and not Josue and Caleb. More than 600,000 people were going to grow old and die in the sand without ever feeling the soil of Val d'Escol beneath their feet. Because they believed your report. The responsibility for that landed on your shoulders like a stone. And then the plague began. It wasn't violent at first. It felt like a fever, the kind the desert sends when the heat is intense and water is scarce. But the fever didn't pass. Of the 10 who had given the negative report, you were the last to fall. You stayed on your feet, watching the others go one by one. Men you knew by name, who had crossed the sea beside you, who had seen the plagues and counted the stars on the same desert nights and eaten the same manna from the same ground. Falling from a fever that didn't choose the weakest, it chose the 10. You understood what was happening while you could still understand. It wasn't punishment for fear. It was punishment for something more specific than fear. You had discredited the promise in front of the people who depended on it. And the people had believed you because you were trustworthy, because you were the chosen one, because you were the man the elders of Naphtali judged worthy. Your credibility was the weapon. Any random man who had said the same things would have been ignored or questioned. But you were Nabi of Naphtali, and every word of yours carried the weight of the trust of an entire tribe behind it. You told the truth, and the truth, in the right mouth at the wrong moment, without the context that made it complete, was more lethal than a lie would have been. A lie could be questioned. A half-truth told with conviction by a man of credibility cannot. Lying on the hot sand of Para, as the fever blurred the edges of things, the last thought you can complete is about the cluster of grapes. The one you saw two men carry in Vale de Escol. That flavor you tasted and thought about sharing with the son you would have, that the son would have shared with the son's son. The flavor the land had to give, that the promise had to give, that Deus had promised to give. You saw it, you tasted it, you knew it was real. And even so, 40 years later, a man named Josue is 80 years old and finally crosses the Jordan. He spent his entire life waiting for what you saw in 40 days. Every night in the desert, every child that was born and grew up without ever having seen Canaan, every burial of someone from your generation who died in the sand, Josue carried the certainty of what he had seen in Hebron and the weight for what he knew was coming. Caleb, 85 years old, specifically asks for the land of Hebron, the city of the giants, the city of the sons of Anake, the city of the stone walls that in your memory was impossible. And Caleb, who grew old in the desert because the people believed the 10 and not him, enters Hebron and conquers what you saw on that misty morning and considered too great to be possible. The sons of Anak were defeated by an 85-year-old man who waited his entire life for what you saw and threw away. The same land, the same giants, the same walls, the same Deus. The difference that changed everything wasn't tactical, it wasn't military, it wasn't numerical. It was the answer to a question you asked wrong for 40 days while walking through an extraordinary land. You asked, "Are we enough for this?" The right question was, is what was promised to us enough? Faith isn't blindness. Faith isn't ignoring what you see. It's not pretending the giants aren't giants or that the walls are made of cardboard. Faith is placing what you see within the context of what was promised. You saw the giants. That was true. You forgot that the giants also saw the sea open, and that, if they knew what you knew, the fear would be theirs, not yours. The weakness was never Israel. It was the calculation Israel made of itself. Fear doesn't come from seeing the enemy. It comes from forgetting who goes before you. If you want to know what Josue saw when he finally entered this same land, subscribe to the channel because this is just the beginning. In the next video, you are Josue. You spent 40 years waiting to enter a land you've already seen, and now the door is open.